Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special episode of Goblin Salvage Rights, the show about TTRPGs, mainly Pathfinder. I'm one of your hosts, Robert.
And I suppose I am Erik, keeping it weird since 1978.
Today's topic is influence.
Influence me, baby.
Let me tell you a little something about influence. It's got mechanics.
Does it? So you're telling me that Pathfinder is going to teach me how to influence people?
Yeah, basically. So today's topic is one of the DMG, what are they called?
Modular
Subsystem.
subsystems.
Yeah, one of the DMG subsystems. Normally, we would talk about a game we played since the last podcast. You know what's been going on, but we just shot these back to back, week to week, and we actually haven't. We didn't get to play a game on Wednesday.
We suck, you lose.
Sorry, it just happens. Sometimes games don't work. Gabby, I guess had some friends in town.
Yeah.
So we actually recorded last podcast on that Wednesday because we had the open slot.
Because Gabby has friends and we do not. So we decided to come look for friends.
It's true.
Are there friends?
I don't see you. And if you do exist, maybe you should leave a comment on the video.
Very nice.
I painted some stuff. I've been getting back into Warhammer painting.
I remember Warhammer.
I recently, so basically I bought a bunch of Warhammer stuff over COVID, like everyone else. And I really got into painting. It was really therapeutic for me. Especially because I was like I'm a huge extrovert. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. And I really didn't get to be an extrovert during COVID for a lot of it. So,
God, I wish I would have thought to build my Skaven army using COVID as an excuse to sit there and paint all day.
Yeah, it was pretty rad.
Can I have COVID back? No way.
But anyway, yeah. So I got back into painting. There's like a club locally, that I might join. You pay instead of playing at an LGS, you basically play, at some weird attic in downtown Portland. It's kind of weird because it's
sounds creepy.
It's kind of weird.
Sketch.
It's like old Portland. It's like an old Portland building, and you go there's this one single door in between two retail spaces, and you go up some stairs, and it's upstairs in an area. It's called Ordo Fanaticus. If anyone's interested, but I played a game with one of the guys there who taught me and another friend of mine kind of how to actually do it in the real meat space. And I had a blast. I really loved it. So
it's cool when you find people who know the rules really well and have the patience to bring you in, sort of induct you into their little cult of nerdiness. I love that. There needs to be more brand ambassadors out there that are just not jerks.
Yeah. I hope this doesn't completely ruin my audio. Actually, I'm not going to take a chance.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think. I think yours will be.
You think I'm good? My little creepazoid will work?
I don't know. Maybe not.
We'll find out.
Okay. But yeah, so anything new with you?
Not since the last time we talked. I did not run my game after all recently. I had the wrong weekend, which I guess it happens. That just gives me more time to prep. So I guess while I haven't been playing anything fun, I've been working on my next Edgewatch installment, which is the beginning of book 2. And every time I transition between books, it takes a long period of time because I want to make sure I stick that landing, or that opening in this case. But no, it's all video games for me. I'm blowing through the Assassin's Creed series because when I finish it, I circle back to the beginning and do it all over again.
Hell yeah.
And that's just how I am.
I got to get you to try Dark Souls or one of the Dark Souls games.
Yeah. God, 6 years you've been talking about Dark Souls.
I know.
I still haven't played the damn thing.
It's too good.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess we'll just jump into the topic.
What is the topic today?
So the thing about the Influence subsystem, a lot of these subsystems really like to gamify parts of role playing that you don't normally have a lot of coded mechanics for. Last episode we talked about exploration mode, and this subsystem lives within exploration mode. It is how to convince people or someone to do a thing you want to do.
Mhm.
Now, very briefly, it's basically like there is a boss or someone you're trying to convince of something,
An NPC of some
an
sort.
NPC, yeah, and you give them stats. Basically, they have influence skills and influence. Basically, they create a point system where as you begin to create influence with this person over the course of rounds, which are measured in the book says,
They got weird divisions for time.
yeah, like
in this
15
subsystem.
minutes to an hour. They kind of depict it as like you're at a banquet dinner and like each meal of the banquet dinner and introductions is a round of this influence system.
That was one of the examples. So
Yeah.
basically, instead of having 6-second combat rounds, which we've been familiar with for decades at this point, there are arbitrary designations for whatever amount of time, but it's still 3 rounds. So that
Yeah.
3 rounds, each round can be 15 minutes up to an hour.
3 rounds? There's some 6-round examples in here.
Okay, I must have glossed over those,
Yeah.
but basically, it's a way to slice and dice time in a way that reflects the what you had to play with. So, like a dinner party doesn't last for 5 minutes, like an extensive combat might, but it'll last all night.
Yeah.
So you got to divide that somehow, and that seems to be how they decided to do this. I'm curious about these weird stat blocks they threw at these NPCs because they're not the same kind of stat blocks that you see like in the bestiary.
They are and they aren't, actually. So one of the awesome things about Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the math, the way the math and DCs break out. And what they basically do is they set, in the influence system, there's 2 actions you can take. There's trying to actually influence someone, gain these points that allow you to create the influence. And then there's research, basically, or discover, as they say. And what this system does is it allows players, not just the face of the party, to be a part of the situation. So there are influence skills that have various DCs. So for instance, accounting lore in their example person, you could use your lore skill to influence them because the NPC in question is of a business mindset. So in the discussion, you're trying to convince them of making a decision based off money. Accounting lore might very well help. So you could use that lore check to either influence them or discover something about them by talking with them, like learning about their strengths and weaknesses within this social context. I thought that was really interesting because it gives players the option to contribute to social encounters in a way that's gamey. And I like games. I like gamey. I like adding these gamey elements so long as they don't detract from the flow of exploration mode.
Right. So yeah, this influence subsystem, I like what you said. There's 2 basic actions you can do. There's the influence action, there's a discover action. So to use your accountant example, your party shows up and they don't know this NPC is an accountant. They would use the discover action to uncover that information through a social encounter. Maybe they talk to some dude across the room and get that information. Maybe they talk to the NPC directly and ferret out that sort of, oh, you're in accounting. That's what you do for a living. That explains a few things. The ink on your fingertips, whatever.
Yeah.
And once that discovery action has been, I guess, resolved, did it utterly fail? Did it fail? Did it succeed? Or did it critically succeed? Based on that, you get points you can throw further into the influence. So once you discover all the bits of information you need about the NPC you're trying to win over an influence, then you can actually go right to the influence action. That's when you're ready to pull the trigger, and the game is on the line at that point for the most part.
And one of the interesting things in the system is they have, as you use that influence action, you build influence points. And as a DM, when you're creating the stat block for the NPC that your players are trying to gain influence with, you have different thresholds of points. So influence 4, influence 6, influence 8. These are arbitrary numbers that these are suggested numbers. You could put the different variations wherever you want. But I think 4, 6, and 8 seem like pretty good standards
That
So
sounds like a spread they're using to differentiate. So like
yeah.
the NPC is strong in some areas and weak in other
Well,
areas.
and no, this is specifically for success, right? These are the success parameters. So after the party has gained 4 influence, Mr. Moleweather in this example gives the troop 1 week to get him back his rent with interest before evicting him. And then as they gain more and more influence points, they get better and better terms on the deal, which is the goal of them in interacting
More
with
influence, you get better
better
results.
success.
Yeah, of course that makes
Exactly.
sense.
Okay. So, and then to compound on that, Mr. Moleweather has resistances and weaknesses. Now, classically in Pathfinder, resistance and weaknesses are things like, I'm a demon and I have resistance to lightning or whatever. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? But in this, it's the NPC's social resistances. So, in this case, the landlord thinks that in practical terms, with little patience for good for nothings of the troop. Appeals directed at sympathy alone increase the check by a DC of 2. And in the context of the math of the game,
Mhm.
increasing a check by 2 is creating a hard um, DC.
Mhm.
Now, going back to the DC system generally in Pathfinder, this example is given for a 3rd level party. So all they did, and they explained it actually very clearly here, which I'm really happy about, is the base DC for pretty much everything is the DC by level, which is 12 or 22. 12 plus 10 is 22. And then from there, they determine, and that's how you get your skill DCs. And from there, they either subtract 2 or 1, depending on how applicable the skill is to convincing this person, um, based on their proclivity and the situation itself. And I really like that you're using this skill system, the scaling system that's really baked into the core of the game, and it's exhibiting itself in a way that you don't normally expect it to, but that really shows the versatility, I think, of the skill system and how pliable it is in order to create all kinds of encounters, not just traps and monsters.
Yeah, no, I get all that. That's good. It sounds like an awful lot of prep work to put into an NPC when, as a GM, you're already putting in a whole bunch of background and story hooks and all the normal stuff you got to do just to run a decent game. This feels like a ton of extra work, and I have to wonder: does it have to be like? Can I just do an off the cuff stat block
Yeah.
without having to go through and make sure everything is balanced?
Mm-hmm.
God forbid anything should be slightly unbalanced in any game anywhere.
Yeah.
But can I just say like this accountant is there's an easier way to win him over. There's a middling way to win him over, and then there's a hard, difficult way to win it over.
That
Just like
is
3 criteria and just call it a day.
I think you can make it that simple. And they say that in the book, obviously.
Mhm.
But this is really these subsystems are really a way to gamify in a lot of ways parts of the game that you and I over the years have kind of just like waved our hands at and just said, like you make a diplomacy check and people can come up with cool ideas to blah blah blah, come up with ideas to influence them on with their own skills, that kind of thing. But I think that especially in games like ours that are so deeply rooted in exploration mode
Mhm.
activities, we joked on the last podcast that like entire games never have combat.
Mhm.
And
It helps when you have a huge cast of characters.
yeah, but I think this is actually a really good subsystem for our party to actually
Mhm.
begin implementing, because it gives some of us who are more game inclined,
Sure.
more gamey players, something to really sink their teeth into and not feel like, oh, I didn't get to roll any dice this game.
Yeah, and all the players too, not just the party face. Like
Yeah.
traditionally in D20 games, at least, and I'm sure all the other ones too. Whoever has the charisma is the guy who's doing all the talking, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones with the pluses to
Mhm.
you know win friends and influence people, whatever that expression is. So like having an influence system that allows your 8 charisma barbarian
Mhm.
to actually have an impact on that social encounter, that's
Mhm.
really cool. Because
Absolutely.
back in the old days, if you wanted to win a social encounter, you throw your bard at it or your high chaw guy. If you have like a fight, okay, you throw your blaster caster at it and maybe your fighter. If you had I don't know, some kind of skullduggery that you need done, you throw your rogue at it. Every game is exactly the same as the one before it. And that's just, it's bored me to tears over the years. So to have something modular like this, where everybody is involved in an influence encounter, and like the chase module, everybody's involved in the dexterity based encounter. It's a really cool thing. It's a way to keep everybody engaged and keep people off their phones because they got to pay attention.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. I think if there's one thing that you and I loathe at a gaming table is people playing on their phones. And Path Builder 2e kind of makes it tough for a lot of us because
everybody's got their damn character sheet on their phones, and I hate it.
It's such a good app.
Yeah.
We actually by the time this comes out, we'll have released a non-pod,
and it has a print option. Please use it.
Yeah. I really love the print, not the print character sheet, but the printed stat block.
Yeah.
That is awesome because a lot of times you have a bunch of extra space at the bottom you can make notes on. I love that function.
It's a great at a glance tool.
Absolutely.
Especially for your GMs.
Exactly. So how would you explain this to players? Would you lay out the system and all the mechanics of how it works, just like combat? Or would you do a lot of these mechanics behind the screen, not letting the players know that they're making these checks?
For sure, I would do it behind the screen because I
think that's where you and I would differ, actually.
Yeah. I've seen way too many players, especially in our group. Subsequent actions and decision making along that decision tree are influenced by the number that they're physically looking at on the die. I don't want that. I want my players to react to the story, not to some random ass numbers that show up on the table. So if I take that behind my screen, and if I do my part as a GM and role play the scenario, if you can tell that your character is questioning at a dinner party, is starting to grate on my NPC's nerves, you're probably not rolling so high.
That's true. But would you explain the actual mechanics of the system to them?
I would in the beginning, almost like in a quasi session 0 kind of a thing. Hey guys, I want to try something new. There's this influence modular subsystem. It treats influence encounters, social encounters, as almost like mini boss fights where you have to cross thresholds in order to get almost like cascading successes. Where before, if you roll an intimidate check, whatever the result is, that's the end of that social encounter. If you roll a diplomacy check and you get a number, that's the end of that social encounter. It just feels so just uninspired. But here, you get a success, and then your partner builds on that success, and your other partner builds on that success, and together you sort of cobble together a social strategy to win this important NPC over, so that you can use that on the next challenge, which is really what all this is about. The influence subsystem is a setup subsystem for me. You're trying to gain an asset that you can later deploy further on in the story. That's my understanding of it. And I kind of think of that in my head as like mini boss fights. So by taking the numbers away and keeping it behind the screen, I can play up surprise in the conversation, and I can just sort of bring out the color of a scene and talk about how different people's words are having different effects on different people in that social interaction. But with raw numbers, it just turns into a mechanical, uninspired, I better try this other tack because clearly I rolled a 1, and it doesn't matter what words are coming out of my GM's mouth. I know I rolled a 1, so I know they're lying to me. And it's a ridiculously artificial experience that is uninspired. So that is why I would keep it behind my my GM screen. But I know you love to look at numbers on the table, especially when they're your numbers.
Yeah, that's true.
So give me your argument for keeping it on your side of the screen.
I think
the player side of the screen.
Yeah, the player side of the screen. I think that this would give this system gives an opportunity for players who love combat and the gamier parts of the game options to never roll for initiative an entire session. And the way when you look at these stat blocks that they have set up for the NPCs, there's a lot of specific skills in here that are applicable.
Sure.
So I think that especially based on these two actions, like the influence and discover actions, like explaining those actions, and I would explain those actions, and
For sure.
I would let them know that there's a series of perception checks
Mhm.
and other kind of checks that they can make. So especially if they're a player like not at our table, like a lot of our players at our table, um, act or say what their character wants to do, and then we come up with the applicable skill.
Mhm.
But I think at a lot of tables, players decide what skill they want to use first and kind of come up with a way to justify it. And that's just a different play style, in my opinion. I don't really begrudge people for doing that. And in matter of fact, I think this is the kind of system that would really nurture players who aren't comfortable role playing, or people who aren't just used to it yet, or
Mhm.
haven't really enjoyed it in the past. This might be a
Okay.
way to be like, hey, you got some cool skills,
Mhm.
and I know you don't like talking that much at the table, but like, you've got some cool skills that would be applicable to this
Sure.
RP moment. So if you want to use them, go right ahead.
Yeah.
And they can talk about how they use them obviously you don't have to talk in your character's voice, but you could. And this could be a good example. This could be a good opportunity for them to finally do that for the first time. And to
Yeah.
me, those are magical experiences.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. There are certainly players who don't have the movie going on in their brains. It's the whole idea of this is sort of it's numbers, it's rules, it's codified. It's there are parameters, there are numbers, there are skills, there are checks to be made, and that's how they think of these games from session to session to session. And there are certainly other players who see it and get it, and they want to watch Star Wars in their brain, and they don't want to see the numbers behind the lightsabers.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's the difference between playing a role playing game and a role playing game.
Yeah.
The emphasis on the syllables
Mhm.
is the important part, and
And how
there,
you spell roll as well. ROLL
yeah,
versus
exactly,
ROLE.
yeah. You know me and my inability to spell things. Um,
No comment.
well, I mean, like for instance, I am notorious for spelling Eric's name wrong. It's Eric with a K, not a C.
7 years this man has known me and can't
7
spell my
years.
name.
Another great example is we have a Patreon tiers, a Google Doc,
Mhm.
and I legitimately wrote that not realizing it was spelled improperly. I put tears as in like crying tears. And Eric laughed at it the other day. He's like, "Oh, that's funny. That's a really good play on words." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Patreon tiers. You're gonna make our Patreon people cry.
I totally meant that. Yeah, I'm clever." But anyway, getting back to this, another idea that I really like about this that I thought of was, in going back to that movie idea, a lot of role playing, games are a group of heroes, like an ensemble movie,
Mhm.
accomplishing something. But a lot of us as players don't think of ourselves, especially I want to say especially newer players to TTRPGs
Mhm.
don't really think of themselves as being in an ensemble movie, because they're really only used to movies with single protagonists,
Mhm.
individual protagonists. And
Sure.
a lot of people
They
come to
feel more like spear carriers than part of an ensemble.
exactly, and a lot of people think of themselves as, when they're designing their character or the idea for their character, they're the hero, and everyone at the table is the hero, and they're all kind of doing that individually instead of as a group.
Sure, and historically that kind of made sense because the fighter does the punching, the wizard does the casting, the
Yeah.
thief does the rogan,
Yeah, exactly.
and the bar does the sleeping with all the barmaids.
Oh my god.
Everybody has that singular task that they're laser focused on. But when you start throwing
Yeah.
these modular systems in, all of a sudden, again, your 8 charisma barbarian can influence the outcome of a social encounter in
Yeah.
a positive way. That's some really cool, and it's about time levels of game design, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure there's been systems like this in the past that we weren't aware of. If there were, actually, I would really love to hear examples in previous editions of role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, where these subsystems were introduced. If anyone knows the history,
The second edition probably had it with
Of
the
these things,
options
I
and
would love to hear
tactics
them,
and
like-
all the black books for that edition.
yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas in the comments or on Twitter, or whatever, wherever we are. I've been speaking of Twitter, that bonfire is raging, and I'm kind of thinking about like jumping onto other social medias in addition to YouTube and Twitter, because those are the two spaces that I know really well. I've known for a while. That and Reddit. So if anyone is jumping on like Mastodon or anything like that, and they want us to like start talking there, just let us know. More than happy to make an account on other social media. I have no allegiance to anything.
You haven't sworn an oath of fealty?
I have not sworn an oath of fealty to the Bird app. But yeah. So do you have any movie references?
Let's get to that, because that's really where the rubber's going to hit the road on this particular conversation. So the Influence Subsystem, and I'm just going to read this verbatim out of here real quick. When the PCs need to gain favor with or sway over an NPC to achieve their goals, sometimes a deception, diplomacy, or intimidation check just isn't enough to get the job done. In these cases, you can implement the Influence Subsystem in a social encounter. So you're digging in and broadening the scope of an individual encounter above just a singular role. So we've talked about cascading effects. We've talked about the everybody gets to chip in a little bit on these encounters. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, that's great, but in order for me to understand anything out of the Pathfinder rulebook, I need a movie to go with it. That's how I grok all this stuff. And the one that immediately jumped to mind was Treebeard, and one of the Lord of the Rings movie. I forget which one it was, probably the second one, where you had a couple of hobbits running around in the whoops, sorry guys. Running around. I'm usually good about that sort of thing.
Treebeard.
So you got a couple of hobbits running around Fangorn Forest, and they're running away from an orc. And here comes this big old Treebeard. He squashes the orc, picks up the hobbits, and walks them towards the Entmoot. And from that moment, they're involved in this social encounter that takes hours and hours and hours, maybe even days. I forget how long it took. But basically, Merry and Pippin had to convince Treebeard to let them go, that they're not orcs, that Saruman is a bad dude, that the world needs them to join the fight. There's sort of like this escalating
series of successes.
Yeah, that they get. You know, going from I'm not an orc to join the war and all of your friends are going to be set on fire. That's the difference between one success and 8 successes, right?
Yeah, that's totally true.
And that 8th success was literally them saying, okay, drop us off at Isengard so that we could put Treebeard's eyes on Isengard so we could see what was going on. And that was the really cool moment in that film where he went, oh, I get it. And we won the influence encounter. It took hours to do and a whole bunch of conversation. And the hobbits had to figure out, you know, what mattered to the NPC, what didn't matter to the NPC. You know, sort of like the NPC's hierarchy of values. We didn't know anything about these tree men.
Sounds like they might have discovered,
done a bunch of
they
discovering,
care about, and then influenced
and
them.
failed a bunch of influence checks
true,
and succeeded, and then did that really cool crit success at the end.
Yeah.
So Treebeard is probably my biggest example, and if you just go back and watch that entire scene, I wonder if on YouTube they just like put all the Treebeard scenes and
I'm sure
just one after another.
I'm like absolutely.
So you don't have to watch all the other garbage to get to it.
If they haven't, I will
do it yourself. Are you committing to that right now?
No, I'm not.
No, yeah, me either.
Definitely don't have the time.
No,
But there definitely is. There definitely is.
So yeah, that's my big that I was able to understand this 3 pages of a system because I understood the scene of Treebeard and how it escalated. And yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of other movies out there, Dances with Wolves, Pulp Fiction, basically any story in which there's an attempt to win over an NPC to your way of thinking. And it takes time. It takes discovery. It takes understanding their hierarchy of values and what they don't value, you know, the things they hate, their weaknesses. You know, trees don't like fire. They don't like axes. That's their weaknesses. And once Pippin kind of played on that, it backfired on him until it didn't at the very end. So that's my movie. Wizard of Oz is another good one. Toto got the final influence point when you pulled back the curtain and we found out who the actual Wizard of Oz was,
Absolutely.
and we won the influence session. What about you? You got any movies?
Well, I wrote down Ocean's 11 versus
Ensemble cast?
Yeah, but it's
Solid.
more of like a. I think that would be a better. Like that's a classic heist movie.
Mhm.
Classic heist movies have an ensemble cast that'll have their own specialized thing. But instead of trying to convince someone to do something, I mean, oftentimes they are convinced. Like the first half of Ocean's 11 is literally
It's
just
a
like-
recruitment phase, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
nothing but influencing.
And that really is just like them slowly building this ensemble that influences each individual person.
Sure, yeah. And instead of yeah.
And in those scenes, like, Clooney and Brad Pitt are
Oh, you just dated yourself.
finding, yeah. Oh, how?
The original Ocean's 11 was Sammy Davis Jr. way back when.
Oh, yeah. No, those are I grew up with the Brad Pitt, George
Yeah.
Clooney Ocean's
Yeah, for
movies, and those are what really hooked
And
me
they're
on.
solid too.
Oh,
I
they're
love 'em.
amazing. Yeah. But yeah, like it just reminds me of that scene where, and I haven't seen the movie in a while. I need to watch it, but that reminds me of that scene where they go into like a diner or something like that. It's Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and another character, and they're kind of talking in code, like
Mhm.
thieves can't almost. And they walk out of there and they're like, you called the guy, you called his daughter, some terrible thing and blah, 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 and stuff like that. Why don't you just wait outside while we talk to him? That's a great example of.
Yeah. They kept pushing Matt Damon off to the side. In that
Yeah, it was
film.
Matt Damon. Yeah. Matt Damon. Oh, wow. What a star-studded cast.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
that's like
Oh my God.
our generation's Cannonball Run.
Yeah. I don't actually know what that movie is. Dating me again. But yeah, so that's a good example of a nearly failed influence scene
Mhm.
where one of the characters tries using a skill that they're not trained in
Mhm.
at all and critically fails
Right.
and almost
And that
ruins
skill
it.
is important because that skill is important to the person we're trying to influence.
Exactly.
So even if you don't have the numbers for it, sometimes you just gotta go for the high rolls.
And in the system, critical failures represent a loss of influence, whereas failures are just a dead negative, a dead zero.
Yep.
So these are all examples in movies
Mhm.
that are applicable to your game.
I wish I would have used the influence in my Edgewatch game. I mean, there are so many NPCs
Yeah.
you guys are coming up against, and you guys keep meeting new people. And these singular diplomacy intimidation roles to influence total outcomes never sat well with me, but I didn't really have an alternative that wasn't a complete and total time sink. And now that I know about the influence subsystem, you better believe it's going to show up immediately.
Heck yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it should feel good to win over an NPC. It shouldn't just be I don't know, like GM whimsy, whether they're going to throw you a bone or not. And it just feels so arbitrary the way some NPCs are into your characters and others just aren't.
Mm.
And by what criteria are we cementing these alliances? It's arbitrary until you throw a system at it. And
Yeah, that's true. That's
this
true.
kind of brings me closer to your side of the game theory table, where I want more mechanics in my role playing, specifically for that reason. I don't like the feeling, like as a player, I hate the feeling that I don't know. I worked up all these great arguments, and I've done this really cool RP session, and I flubbed a diplomacy check because I can't roll more than a 2 on any given night.
Yeah.
It's obnoxious, and it's not a game at that point. It's just punishment.
And I think actually for a player who is so notoriously bad at rolling
Mhm.
like you, I think this is actually a really good system for that because
Yeah, because I get to share the burden with people who can roll with the crap.
you get to ruin it for everyone else. Is really what it is. But no, seriously, like if you're playing the face of the party
Mhm.
and you're rolling all the charisma checks, then the party's fucked.
Mhm.
The party will have to be the murder hobo squad
Mhm.
that everyone dreads parties devolving into
Yeah.
because they just can't garner any influence with anyone. But in this system, the party face can still be the party face. Maybe they can be the pitch hitter or whatever metaphor. They're the one who actually uses the influence
Some important
action.
sportsy guy.
Yeah. But everyone else is making sure that they're doing it in the right way.
Yeah.
Or something
Yeah.
like that. Or there's a check that uses intelligence or accounting lore or um, performance. Oh, that's Dex.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. You know, by using the discover action, you can determine what
crafting. That's another great example.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Like what's important to the NPC. If they're a crafter,
or
don't talk to them about the ballet.
knowledge, like religion or nature, depending on the like the kind of NPC there are. You as a DM could come up with, other checks that are related to their personality.
Yeah, and again, this is a system that encourages weaknesses, resistances, background, personality, penalties. I'd love to see one of these encounters where you talk to a druid, and you know the first thing everybody's going to lean on is nature lore, right?
Absolutely.
But what if that druid's like, you don't get to talk about nature, only we get to talk about nature.
Oh yeah,
and you get to subvert the expectations of the party, right? And you can do it mechanically now instead of just arbitrarily because it's cheeky fun and goodness. And it's, you know, all you got to do is prep that stat block ahead of time.
Exactly.
And I guess that brings me to a question. As a GM, how many of these NPC influence stat blocks does a GM need?
This really boils down to prepping and how DMs prep. And
I don't want one of these stat blocks for every single NPC in a given session. That just sounds awful.
Insane. So I would probably rely on Vance's time-tested ability to just ask his party, hey, what are we doing next session? You know, and honestly, we could do an entire episode on like how to prep for a game. Honestly, I think that's important. That would be a really great episode.
Good idea.
Topic. But like, if you know you're going into a social situation, you know, a good example is the dinner in spoilers. We're about to spoil something.
I'm not. He is. Blame him.
Spoil. Age of Ashes. I think it's like book
we're going
3.
Way back. Yeah.
We were all at that dinner. Remember the dinner?
Vaguely.
Like 2 or 3 of the major bad NPCs were there, and a lot of us players didn't even realize it. So the reason I remember it so much is because I was playing the face. I was playing the spy of the party. I was the Cha character. So to me, it was really, really involved with all of the intrigue and stuff like that.
I remember now.
Okay, yeah. There you go. This would have been the perfect system because not only do you have.
I don't think the system was actually created yet.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That
book hadn't. Yeah, I think the DMG hadn't come out yet. But this would have been the perfect system for that because not only did you have 1 or 2 specific NPCs that were really important. Excuse me. You had 3 or 4 other NPCs that were kind of important.
Yeah.
And you could have knocked out a stat block for 6 of them. And that would have been 1 or 2 sessions worth of gameplay.
Yeah.
And I think when coming up with a stat block, the book has really good advice on it. But it's basically just think of this archetypal person. What is their background? Like, what is their backstory? Where did they come from? You know, write 2 or 3 sentences down of, well, you know, Tammy was born to a very rich family and she had everything given to her. Or, you know, Tammy was born to a really poor family and really values frugality or something like that. You know, write that down and then begin to start from the top down on the stat block here. Start with influence skills. So define all of the major charisma based skills. Give a DC to each of them, and that should be a DC based on the party's level, right? And then choose like 1 or 2 of them that should be easy, 1 or 2 of them that should be hard. You know, maybe Tammy hates people intimidating her because she grew up on the streets where there were a bunch of bullies, and she hates bullies. As you should. So maybe intimidation is harder, so you add 2 to it. Maybe diplomacy is easier for a reason you come up with, and subtract 2 from it or 1 from it. And then as we go down the stat block, there are influence levels. So obviously you want to get something out of Tammy, right? Your goal is trying to influence Tammy to do something. So create create a scenario. Imagine a scenario that the players just barely succeed. Imagine a scenario that is medium success, and then imagine an amazing scenario.
That's weird because when you're throwing monsters out of the bestiary, you can treat them as like moderate challenges, low challenges, severe challenges. This feels like it's all of those, depending on which direction you're attempting to attack the problem.
Well, here's the thing, Erik, that I think you're beginning to realize about Pathfinder 2nd Edition is that every monster has a weak save. Every monster has a weakness. And half of counterbalancing and half of the party's job is discovering what the weakness is and then striking that weakness. I mean, like that is the gameplay loop for casters for the most part. It's discover weakness, cast a spell that targets that weakness. And that's kind of what the system is all about. And then from there, speaking about the weaknesses, resistances and weaknesses, think of non-skill related things think of one non-skill related thing, like the actual skill kind of ability skill. Think of one type of persuasion that Tammy, I was just creating this character named Tammy
instead of using the actual sample stat block.
Well, because I want to like come up with it on the fly to show you kind of like how you could do it at your table. So, Tammy, there's something Tammy really doesn't like and something Tammy's really, I want to say weak against, but really warm to, right? And then write down the 2 or 3 sentences about Tammy's background, and you're pretty much done. Appearance, personality, and penalty. Penalty is a good one. Antagonizing Mr. Moleweather by sermoning or wasting his time causes him to cut the meeting short, reducing it to 2 rounds instead of 3.
So how I'm hearing that is there's a way for a player to shorten the encounter by doing something bad.
Yeah, so more rounds are better,
right?
Essentially.
You have more time to gain points.
Exactly. So when you're thinking about balancing the encounter, really consider the amount of time you're going to give your players and the skills that they have available to them in contrast to the levels of influence. So if there's only 3 rounds and you only have like 3 players at your table, maybe 8 influence just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Right.
Do the
I'm
math.
guessing all these numbers are scheduled around like a 4-player table.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you have 3 rounds of 4 players doing an action around, that's 12 total.
Like 2 of them discover, 2 of them influence.
Exactly right. How many discovers before you attack the influence?
Exactly.
Wait, we got to do more discovery here, and then an influence. Like knowing when to strike and when to gather information is it just sounds like a dynamic social encounter that again gets the 8 charisma barbarian involved in it.
Absolutely.
And that sounds super rad.
Would you
only took 3 pages to do this system.
I think they could have. They definitely could have expanded out to 6 and given more examples and given you some better ability.
As long as they teach me how to set the DCs, which is what they do on 153 of my copy. That's the thing. So everything we just said is really couched around how do we create numbers to indicate the success threshold, and that's setting the DCs. We need easy DCs, we need moderate DCs, we need difficult DCs because people are complicated. We like things, we dislike things, we're sort of ambivalent about things. And when people are trying to influence me and they start talking to me about books, I'm an easy DC.
Yeah. And if this all sounds arbitrary to you and you as a DM feel like there's no backing to any of this, welcome to DMing.
Yeah.
All of it is arbitrary. We should make jackets. I'm sure everyone has jackets already, but we should make cool biker jackets.
They'll wear ours. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can get flashes, goblin flashes.
Ooh, it'll be like denim. We'll have like black denim jackets.
Right.
I'm liking this. It's very Portland. Actually, I just realized how painfully Portland that is. Oh my God.
That's okay. You can wear it in your attic miniature gaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any I think we're almost at like 45, 50 minutes. Do you have any you have any thoughts?
I just want to throw out a couple of more examples because, again, I grok all of these subsystems using movies and TV shows, and that's just the way my brain works. So Treebeard from Lord of the Rings, I already talked about that. Everybody pitched in trying to figure out how to get the Wizard of Oz, to get them their heart, their brain, their courage, their ride home, all of it. And, anybody who's ever seen it knows how that panned out. The Sopranos was actually a weird one for me once I started thinking about it, and then I liked it more and more the more I thought about it. So in The Sopranos, the whole show is basically a mob boss who's having anxiety attacks. So he goes to see a therapist, and you're not allowed to do that in the mob, apparently. At least not the older mobs. Maybe newer mobs are different. I don't know. But
socially progressive mobs have what do you call it? Mental health days.
Yeah.
I mean, why not?
But all those scenes where he's sitting there talking to his therapist, the therapist is basically doing influence challenge with Tony Soprano and asking questions and getting Tony to talk, to extrapolate, to just tell me about your mother, all that stuff. And there's a series of dead ends. There's a series of, I guess, within the conversations, she finds difficult things to talk about with high DCs. She finds fairly simple things to talk about with really low DCs. And then there's stuff that he sort of brushes away because he's kind of ambivalent on it, doesn't want to, interact with it. But in any of those therapy scenes with Tony Soprano is a great example of the influence system, minus players 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah. And I think this gets back to that idea of a lot of media are single heroes and not groups of heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And
that tends to, frame my own expectations of these kinds of things. Like the hero's journey has messed up any other version of a story I can ever think of because I have to actively think outside the hero's journey box in order to see different shapes of different narratives. But that's a whole nother thing. Braveheart, remember when he stands in front of the army and then, freedom and we charge and
that's
and
the last
attack?
thing I had written on my notes.
Yeah, you had Braveheart?
No, but I had influence on a crowd.
On a crowd. Okay, talk about that.
So just real quick, like these, you can, once you've kind of gotten to the idea of NPCs having stat blocks, you can begin to extrapolate on what an NPC is.
Mm-hmm.
So an NPC could also be a boss, An NPC could be the dragon at the end of the dungeon.
Sure.
You could just convince the dragon to like stop eating people.
Yeah, your mimic toilet seat.
Or whatever. What? What?
Your mimic toilet seat.
Wait.
Can be an NPC. Build. Come.
Oh, God.
I want you to think about this long and hard after this episode is done.
Okay. But also crowds could be, I'm just thinking about how terrifying it would be to sit on a mimic toilet seat. Okay. Crowds.
All I'm saying is your food comes to you. It's like,
oh my God.
it's like DoorDash for monsters.
Crowds. So, you could, I'm so hard for me to like,
I broke him, everybody.
That. Yeah. Yeah. So crowds, you could move past the idea of it being a single individual and being an entire crowd of individuals. An entire crowd of people who have preferences, an angry mob or a band of brothers ready to go to war.
Sure.
Or,
like in the Bestiary 3, aren't there like troop rules for groups of monsters? This is kind of like a version of that.
Oh God, and they're so good.
Yeah.
They're actually
I haven't had a
really
chance to
good.
use them yet, but yeah.
I used them
on
our Wednesday game.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was really happy. I was really happy with the way they turned out. I'm excited to see more troop. Excited to see more troop characters.
Like unofficial material, especially.
Yeah.
Oh.
More monster manuals. I actually don't own any of the monster manuals.
Sure you do. You have 3 copies of the exact same one.
No, but I mean like for second edition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
do you need 3 copies of the second one?
I might end up with 3 copies of the DMG or of the monster manual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts?
Influence Subsystem, do it. It's good. It'll make your role play heavy players probably happier. The people who tend to just sit in the corner of the room and they're like, little wallflowers at the D&D table. It'll force them to get involved because they've got to, they're a part of it. Their roles are a part of the math. So it gets everybody in the room involved. It encourages role play and it brings a little bit of gamification into something that was super fuzzy beforehand and arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So if you're feeling like if you're a DM or even if you're a player,
Mhm.
you know, maybe suggest this to your DM. You know, if you're feeling like a lot of the social encounters seem a little arbitrary,
Yeah.
suggest this to your DM and be like,
or if
hey,
diplomacy and intimidation rules are just the samey, and every game is exactly the same as the one before it, this will change that in a hurry.
you want a little spice in your bedroom,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
or your game room.
I know I do.
Yeah. Spice it up.
I'm
Spice
gonna
it up.
do a little bit of influence encounter when I get home tonight.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. I think that's it for today.
Yep.
Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, tell your friends about us. Honestly, the best way to support us is to just like let people know that we exist. As of the recording, we have 30 subscribers on YouTube, so that's kind of crazy.
We love you all.
So yeah, just tell people, talk to people about the podcast, let them know. 5-star us on places, that'd be rad. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Keep it weird, goblins.
Keep it weird, goblins.